Okay, let's unpack this because I want you to imagine you walk into a shoe store, right?
Okay.
You find this great pair of sneakers, you take them up to the register, and you pay the cashier. Now imagine if the company that made those shoes looked at that one transaction and said, hey, the money we paid the cashier to ring up that sale was less than the price of the shoe, so we are incredibly profitable.
Yeah, you would think they're completely out of their minds. I mean, what about the leather
Mm,
or the factory?
exactly. The years of research and development to actually, you know, design the shoe in the first place.
Right. It's a complete financial illusion.
Hmm.
You are looking at like the absolute final millimeter of the transaction and just ignoring the massive underlying mountain of debt required to get the product onto the shelf.
And yet, based on this fascinating breakdown we're looking at today from a YouTube channel called The Prime Time, that exact financial illusion is, well, it's propping up the AI tools you're probably using every single day.
Yeah, it really is.
So our mission for this deep dive is figuring out why the era of cheap, limitless AI is about to hit a brick wall and what that actually means for your daily workflow. Because there's this pervasive narrative out there, right? People constantly claim AI companies are just rolling in cash simply because they make a few cents of profit on individual user requests.
Right. And that narrative focuses entirely on this concept called inference, which is it's simply the computing power required by a server to answer your specific prompt in that exact moment.
Like when I ask a chatbot to write an email or something.
Exactly. When you do that, the cost of generating those specific words is relatively low. But treating inference as your only metric of profitability completely ignores the multi-billion-dollar reality of training these models from scratch.
Right.
So today, we need to look at the massive burn rates happening behind closed doors, the quiet ways companies are testing your willingness to pay, and the broader economic reality of an industry that is essentially consuming itself to keep you hooked.
Yeah, and to really see that reality, we have to look at how these companies are quietly testing the waters with your wallet. Like Anthropic, the company behind the Claude AI models, they actually just pulled a fascinating, somewhat sneaky move to figure out what people will tolerate.
They did, yeah. It's a strategy called a painted door test.
Which I had always thought of that as just a harmless software design trick, you know? But they sort of weaponized it here.
Well, yeah. In traditional product management, a painted door test, or a fake door test, is just a way to gauge demand. You put up a button or a pricing tier for a feature that doesn't actually exist yet. Then you just track how many people try to click it or buy it.
It saves you from spending millions developing a product nobody wants.
Exactly. If a lot of users try to open the painted door, you know you have a viable market.
Finding the area under the curve, basically. Like if you raise your prices by 10%, maybe you lose a few customers, but the ones who stay are paying enough extra that your overall revenue goes up. But Anthropic did something much more aggressive than just putting up a fake button, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. They moved beyond a hypothetical test.
Oh.
They actively removed access to a highly desired feature.
Yes. A tool called Claude Code. They quietly removed it from their standard $20 a month tier for a very specific, targeted group of users.
Which is brutal if you rely on it.
Totally. So imagine you're in this unlucky test group. You log in, expecting to use the coding assistant you rely on every day, and suddenly you are staring at a $100 a month paywall. They intentionally cornered a small percentage of their user base to see how many would swallow a 500% price hike just to keep their workflow intact.
Taking away a feature people rely on feels like a massive breach of trust to a loyal user.
Hmm.
But you have to look at the underlying mechanics of why a company like Anthropic feels forced to run a test that aggressive.
Right, which brings us back to the shoe salesman analogy.
Exactly, and the fallacy of inference profitability.
Mhm.
Because building a cutting-edge AI model is an exercise in astronomical sunk costs.
Yeah, the primetime breakdown used the progression of the Opus models to illustrate this perfectly. We saw Opus 45, then 46, and then Opus 47, which developers were actually pretty unhappy with.
Yeah, they really were.
People described Opus 47 as being tarted up, which is a great way of saying they bolted on a bunch of unnecessary features to a model that was fundamentally bloated, making it slow and heavy compared to leaner alternatives.
Right, and consider the mechanics of creating just one of those iterations. Training a model like Opus 45 requires gathering petabytes of high-quality data, paying specialized researchers massive salaries, and running server farms packed with tens of thousands of specialized microchips for months on end.
And that costs billions of dollars before a single customer ever types a prompt.
Exactly, billions. Once the market moves on to Opus 46, or if a model like Opus 47 ends up being unpopular and users skip it entirely, that initial investment doesn't roll over into the next project.
The money is just gone.
Lost entirely into server exhaust. You cannot rely on the tiny margins of inference making a microcent of profit on answering a single coding question to dig you out of a multi-billion-dollar crater once that specific model becomes obsolete.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting because the sheer scale of that crater is just hard to wrap your head around. Let's look at OpenAI. They recently secured a mind-boggling $120 billion investment.
Which is a staggering number.
It is. For almost any enterprise on Earth, that is infinite money. That is, we can operate for the next century kind of money. But for OpenAI, current estimates suggest that investment gives them a runway of just 18 to 24 months.
Yeah. Let the math on that runway sink in for a second. To burn through $120 billion in 2 years means they're operating in the hole to the tune of $5 to $7 billion every single month.
It makes me think of building a massive, hyper-luxurious cruise ship. But the company didn't bring any fuel, so the only way they can keep the massive engines running is by sending the crew into the ballrooms, ripping up the ship's own expensive mahogany furniture, and throwing it into the furnace.
Wow.
Right? Like, they are moving forward, but they are physically consuming themselves to do it.
What's fascinating here is how that analogy highlights the unsustainable urgency of their situation. They are shoveling unprecedented venture capital into the furnace just to keep the lights on and keep you, the user, engaged.
Yeah.
And that is exactly why Anthropic is testing that $100 a month door. These astronomical burn rates matter to you because they prove that the current flat rate $20 a month AI subscription is a subsidized fantasy.
Yeah.
It is not tied to the reality of the compute cost.
And we are already watching that fantasy collapse in real time. I mean, it's not just startups doing sneaky painted door tests. Even legacy tech giants that are massively profitable are hitting the brakes on how they bill for AI.
Right. The era of the flat rate buffet is rapidly giving way to token economics.
Microsoft just completely changed the rules for GitHub Copilot, which is a massive shift for anyone writing software. Historically, paying for Copilot gave you a set amount of actions or executes. You pay your flat fee, you get your code completions. Simple.
Very straightforward.
But Microsoft just transitioned away from that flat rate model to charging by token usage.
And to understand why that transition is necessary, we need to break down what a token actually is mechanically. Because when an AI reads your prompt, it doesn't see words the way we do.
Right.
It breaks the text down into tokens, which are essentially chunks of characters. Every single time the AI processes one of those chunks, and every time it generates a new one in its response, a server somewhere has to perform a series of incredibly complex mathematical calculations.
And not all calculations are created equal. If you are executing a command on a relatively lightweight, efficient model, like the composer feature inside the Cursor code editor, it costs almost nothing in server power.
Right, very cheap.
But if you try to run that exact same prompt on a heavyweight, state-of-the-art frontier model like Opus 47, it requires 20 times more computing juice to generate the exact same tokens.
Which is huge. From a cloud provider's perspective, giving a user a flat rate of actions is financial suicide if you allow them to choose the model. It basically guarantees that every user will eventually default to the most expensive, computationally heavy model for every minor task, bankrupting the provider in the process.
I keep thinking about this like an all-you-can-eat buffet that suddenly starts charging by the calorie.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. Management opened the doors for a flat $20, assuming people would fill up their plates with cheap bread rolls and pasta. But then everyone walked in, ignored the bread entirely, and went straight for the expensive lobster.
Yeah, of course they did.
So now the restaurant is panicking, saying, wait, you can't eat 20 plates of lobster for $20. So they changed the rules. Now you have to pay for every single bite of lobster you take.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this shift from flat rate to calorie charging explains the absolute panic we are starting to see behind closed doors at major non-tech corporations. Because when you charge by the token and you unleash these tools inside a massive enterprise, the financial blowouts are catastrophic.
Which brings us to the Uber story from the breakdown, and man, this completely upends how businesses plan their IT budgets. Uber management reportedly handed down a mandate to their employees to maximally use AI.
Right.
They even stated they were going to judge employee performance based on how much they were utilizing these new generative tools.
It's a classic top-down corporate mandate. Management wants to embrace the future and drive efficiency, assuming the software costs are fixed.
Exactly what you'd expect.
Yeah.
But they built their 2025 financial forecasts on the assumption of that $20 flat rate buffet. And within just 4 months of this mandate, Uber realized their employees had blown through the company's entire annual AI budget. 4 months. They ordered everyone to eat as much lobster as possible and were completely blindsided when the cloud providers handed them the itemized receipt.
It is a massive red flag for the broader industry. It proves that unregulated, unmonitored AI usage is currently economically unviable for businesses at scale. People simply don't realize how quickly tokens add up, particularly when AI is integrated deeply into automated background workflows.
Yeah, and the breakdown highlighted a perfect example of this during a sponsor segment for a tool called CodeRabbit. It paints a very real picture of how integrated and, frankly, invisible this token consumption is. In software development, there are these code criminals, people writing things like nested ternaries and global state.
Yeah, and for those unfamiliar with the terminology, a nested ternary is essentially a messy, tangled web of logic. It's code where changing one tiny variable on one side of an application breaks an entirely unrelated feature on the other side.
Spaghetti code.
Exactly.
And traditional automated spell checkers for code, known as linters, aren't smart enough to catch that kind of structural mess. So developers are now using AI tools to review their code. But think about the mechanics of how that actually works. When a developer submits new code to the main project, which is called a pull request, an AI agent reads it.
And if you have an AI agent reviewing every single pull request across an entire engineering department, reading thousands of lines of code, and generating one-click fixes, well, that is a massive, continuous fire hose of token consumption.
Right. You aren't just querying a chatbot once a day to write an email. Your entire development pipeline is chugging tokens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the background. No wonder Uber ran out of money by April.
The baseline cost of operating a modern digital business is fundamentally shifting beneath our feet.
I have a major disconnect here. I really need to push back on the narrative we're hearing from the industry.
Okay, what is it?
Well, if the underlying math of AI is this grim, if they are burning $7 billion a month, if enterprise companies are blowing their annual budgets in a single quarter, if the current pricing is just a temporary mirage, then why are the leaders of these AI companies constantly on television telling us this technology is essentially magic that's about to end human labor?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question.
Right.
And the reality of that disconnect, it really comes down to pure survival.
Because we see Sam Altman of OpenAI and Dario Amodei of Anthropic in the news constantly with this doom-laden hype. They say things like, this technology is so powerful, we're going to take your job very soon. I feel terrible about it, but it's inevitable.
You hear that a lot.
Right. So if their companies are actually struggling to keep the furnace lit, is it possible that the fear we feel as everyday workers, the anxiety about becoming obsolete, is actually just a manufactured emotional lever they are pulling?
This raises an important question about the relationship between public messaging and private financials. When your burn rate requires you to raise $5 to $7 billion a month just to survive, you cannot walk into a venture capital meeting and sell a story about an incremental, expensive, and difficult-to-scale software product.
No, of course not.
VCs are looking for 100x returns. To get their money, you have to sell a revolution. You have to convince the market that if they don't hand you billions of dollars right now, they will miss out on the most transformative, world-altering technology in human history.
It's fear-based fundraising, like give us your capital or we will automate your entire portfolio and you will be left with nothing.
Impartially speaking, severe financial desperation breeds extreme public messaging. You have to hype the existential danger and the godlike power of the tool to justify the unprecedented capital required to build it. But to really see how manufactured that hype is, you just have to look at the contrast provided by the one company not playing the survival game.
Google, the massive, profitable exception to the rule.
Exactly. Google is pouring an estimated $100 to $200 billion a year into their AI infrastructure. That is a staggering amount of money, far exceeding the burn rates of the startups we've discussed. But there is one crucial difference in their operational reality.
Google's core search business is so immensely profitable that they actually make money overall. After spending $200 billion on AI, they still post a massive profit. They don't have to go hat in hand to investors every 6 months begging for a cash injection just to survive the fiscal year.
And because of that quiet financial security, their marketing tone is noticeably different. They are absolutely competing on the frontier, trying to win the market share, but you do not hear the same existential doomsday hype coming from their executive team.
Which is incredibly ironic. The breakdown points out that Google literally invented the T in GPT.
They did, yeah.
They created the transformer architecture, the underlying algorithmic breakthrough that makes all of these modern language models possible. They invented the tech, but somehow fumbled the bag and weren't the first to bring a slick consumer product to market. Yet, because they have infinite runway from their search monopoly, they simply don't have to play the fear-mongering VC game.
It provides a critical lens through which to view the daily news cycle. When you hear an AI CEO claim their model is about to fundamentally change the fabric of reality, you have to ask yourself, are they stating a scientific fact about their software? Or are they pitching their next Series G funding round?
So, what does this all mean? That is such a clarifying way to look at it. It completely takes the power away from the hype cycle. But, even with all of this, the shaky economics, the sneakily rising prices, the manufactured doom-mongering designed to separate VCs from their cash, the breakdown doesn't actually end on a negative note.
No, it doesn't.
It takes a surprisingly optimistic pivot that I found really refreshing.
It's a necessary pivot. Because despite the structural flaws in the industry's business models, the actual tangible utility of the technology for you, the individual user, remains profoundly empowering if you know how to use it smartly.
Yeah, the host of the Primetime argues that right now is actually the greatest time to be alive, simply because we have the tools to build whatever comes to mind. And he compares it to historical alternatives in a way that had me laughing out loud.
Oh, right, the Oregon Trail comparison.
Yes, he says, sure, AI tokens are getting expensive, but at least you aren't dying of tetanus because you stepped on a piece of rusty metal in the dark. Or, my personal favorite, dying of dysentery on the Oregon Trail.
It is a humorous but highly effective way of grounding the conversation.
It puts our modern tech complaints into a very humbling perspective. We sit around groaning, oh no, my automated code reviewer costs an extra $20 a month, and the interface is lagging. Meanwhile, an early pioneer is writing in a journal, my entire family perished fording the river today. It's a fantastic reminder that despite the corporate games, we have access to absolute marvels.
And even users who deeply love the traditional way of doing things are finding immense value. The breakdown specifically mentions triad coders.
Those are essentially traditional hand coders, right? People who genuinely enjoy the manual craft of writing syntax from scratch.
Yes, even developers who refuse to let an AI write their architecture are admitting that the convenience of having an AI assistant to handle the boilerplate is immense. It doesn't have to be an all-or-nothing prospect where AI replaces human agency.
And there was one really fantastic, highly specific pro tip in there for you listening on how to leverage this. If you are trying to learn something new, especially in programming, you go find an open source software project. You clone the repository down to your local machine, which just means downloading the raw source code of a public project to your own computer.
Right.
You open that code up alongside your AI of choice, and you just ask the AI to explain it to you.
You can highlight specific chunks and ask, explain exactly how this function works. Or, why did the original developers structure the database this way? What does this specific line do in plain English?
It acts as the ultimate personalized documentation. You aren't just reading a static, confusing textbook that assumes you already know the basics. You have a tireless tutor sitting next to you that can instantly translate complex, nested logic into a simple explanation tailored exactly to the specific part you don't understand.
Which is amazing.
That is an incredible, real-world superpower.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
The underlying business models of these AI giants might be mathematically shaky, and their marketing might be hyperbole designed to secure funding, but the ability to accelerate your own learning and expand your capabilities is very real. You just have to be deliberate about how you leverage the tools.
So, to wrap up this journey, we've seen the cracks in the foundation of the AI economy. We've explored Anthropic's sneaky painted doors, pushing users to a $100 tier just to see if the market will bear it. We've looked inside OpenAI's multi-billion-dollar furnace, burning cash, just to keep the cruise ship moving.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We've seen Microsoft end the flat rate buffet, forcing developers to pay by the token, and watched Uber learn the hard way that you can't mandate unlimited AI usage without blowing your annual IT budget in a single quarter.
We've also peeled back the curtain on the hype machine, recognizing that the fear of AI taking your job is largely a marketing strategy to keep venture capital flowing, a fact highlighted by the quiet, profitable reality of Google.
But through all of that noise, the immense power of having a personalized AI tutor remains. So for you listening right now, the takeaway is clear: look past the doomsaying marketing. Stop worrying about the hype cycle, but start being incredibly intentional with your token usage. The tools are amazing, but they are no longer free, and frankly, they never really were. We're just finally seeing the real cost of making the shoe.
And that reality leaves us with a critical, lingering thought to consider. If these AI companies must inevitably transition entirely to expensive, usage-based token pricing just to survive their own burn rates, are we accidentally creating a massive new digital divide? As these models become smarter and more essential to daily productivity, will we enter a world where only the wealthiest enterprises and the highest-earning individuals can actually afford the intelligence required to stay competitive? Something to think about the next time you ask a model to summarize a document.